In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the coolest new features in AutoCAD 2010, and that's called dimensional constraints. All right, to get started, let's draw a rectangle. So I'm going to come over here to my Draw tab, pick Rectangle, and just kind of arbitrarily draw a rectangle. Now I'm going to click over on the Parametric tab, and I can see that dimensional constraints are found right next to the geometric constraints. Now, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and apply an auto constraint to my object. So I'm going to pick the auto constraint button and I'm going to select this entire object. And we've covered that in a previous tip. So if you aren't familiar with that, you might want to go back and review. Okay, we see that the constraints that are added, or we have a few parallel constraints here to make sure that all these lines are parallel to each other. We have a horizontal one constraint applied to make sure this line stays horizontal, and we have a perpendicular one to make sure these two lines stay perpendicular. So really all these work together to make sure that we always have basically a rectangular shape. This horizontal constraint's not going to allow us to rotate any of these lines, and since they're all parallel to each other, that means that if this line can't rotate, none of them can rotate. So we're going to always have a rectangle that's kind of oriented in a vertical or horizontal direction. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to apply a linear dimensional constraint. And whenever we select that, we see down in our command line that it wants to know the first constraint point. So I could pick over here, and then it would ask me for a second constraint point, or we see that if we hit enter, then it's going to ask us to select an object. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to hit enter, and I'm going to select this line right here, and I'm going to drag it up. And notice it looks just like a dimension line. The only difference is it has this little designation. It says D1 equals, and in this case, 1985. And down here, it's wanting us to confirm that. It wants us to confirm it. So we can either type in a number or just hit enter. I'm just going to hit enter in this case. And I'm going to do another one. I'm going to click on linear, and this time I'm going to go ahead and pick the 2 points. And I'm going to drag, and I'm going to accept the value right there. So far, nothing's really changed. Everything is basically the same as if we were dimensioning. It just looks a little different. Got this little lock symbol and all that. But let's take a look at some of the changes now. First of all, I'm going to open up my Parameters Manager by clicking on this icon right here. And we see that we have the names of the dimensional constraint, and we have some values here in the expressions. So first of all, here's the names, and we can change the names if we want. We can change this to be length. And we could change this one to be depth if we would like. And notice that it changes them over here. The other thing is I can come over here on this length and I can change that to 2,000 units. And notice it grew, the geometry grew to be 2,000. Now it actually grew over here into this direction, but if I wanted to go the other direction, I could always add a geometric constraint, and I could add a fix constraint, and I could tell it to fix this point down here. And now if I come over here and let's say I change this to 3,000, we see that it grows the other direction. So that's kind of cool. But here's another great thing about dimensional constraints. I can come over here and I can actually tell it, I've got a depth right here, and we can see it over here, it's 937. I'm going to change it to say that I want it to be length divided by 2. And what that does is it uses this dimensional constraint, which I labeled length. Before it was called D1, so had I left it D1, I could have said D1 divided by 2. But now it's called length, so now length divided by 2 is my depth. And what that does is it makes sure that my geometry is always in a 2-to-1 ratio. So if my length is 3,000, then my depth is going to be 1,500. And I can see those values right here. So let's just kind of look at what this means. If I select this dimensional constraint here, and I have some arrows so I can drag it, and as I drag this over, and I'm increasing the length, it's also changing the depth automatically. So that's one of the really cool things about dimensional constraints, and there's a lot more to it than that. This is just a good way to get started as an introduction. So what I would say is just spend a little bit of time playing around with the the basics there, and we're going to get much deeper in further videos.